Okay. Thank you so much, Francis, for setting this up. Hi, everybody. So my name is Mo. I'm one of the tutors here at the Queller Prep team, and I just wanted to let you all know I'm really excited about sharing all of the knowledge I have about this, so that you all can prep properly for this. Right, preparation is the keys to success, and so we're going to talk about the exam as a whole, give you all an overview of how it's been graded, how it's changed, what Hunter has been doing in the last few years to kind of keep this test somewhat unpredictable to some degree, and we'll go through like the reasons behind it and why and what their kind of philosophy is about um, their ethos behind academia. And then we're going to go through specifically reading comprehension today. I know that the next 2 days following the series is going to focus on math as well as the essay, so I'll let the speakers there talk about those things more in detail. So let's just begin with, like I said, if preparation is the key to success, we need to know the test that we're going to be handling. So if everyone is following along on my share screen, I've just moved on to the next page. And the first thing that we're going to look at is knowing thy test, right? So the Hunter test is the only thing they look at for admissions, and it has been the case. Now, not every single student is allowed to take the test. There's a cutoff set every single year by Hunter based off fifth graders in New York City who have achieved a certain score in both their reading and math statewide test scores. So sorry, citywide test scores. And so that has already been set. And so most of you already know if you've qualified or not. And I assume you all have, and that's why you're prepping ahead to see what the Hunter test is like. It is unlike any of the other tests that you've taken because it focuses on different aspects of your learning, but it also focuses on other things that might not be purely academic. So I'll give you an example. The entirety of the test is given to you all, and you have roughly about 3 hours to take the test. And in those 3 hours, it's up to you to understand how to best manage your time. So time management is a skill you'll need to work on, which isn't necessarily something that is actively tested, right? But in this test is really important. The test is unique because it has two big sections, which are multiple choice and the essay. But even within multiple choice, it is further broken down into two sections as well, which is the ELA, reading comprehension for our purposes, as well as the math. Now, the other thing is that on the Hunter test, the math and the reading don't have an equal amount of questions. There are more questions in reading comprehension than there are in math, but the two sections are weighed equally. So let me give you an example. Historically, this has been the case where there are 50 reading comprehension questions and 30 math questions. As I'm writing, I just want everyone to just give me a thumbs up if they can see my writing appear on the screen. I just want to confirm that everyone can see it. So thank you. I see the thumbs up emotes being used. Please keep your videos off just because we don't want any kind of distraction from that end. But I see everyone else has been giving me the thumbs up. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can put it down in the chat so you don't forget. And I promise that we will take time in between throughout these 2 hours to address those questions to the best of our ability. Okay, great. Thank you. So now, to give you a breakdown of these two, the 50 reading comprehension questions could each be worth one raw point, right? And I'll use RP, and that's 50 raw points. Whereas each math question is worth 5/3 of a raw point. And so if we do the math there, this is going to be worth 50 raw points. So they're weighed evenly, even though the number of questions are not the same, which means that in theory, each math question is weighed a little bit more. Now, why is this important, right? Because every single year, there's a set cutoff. Now, what is the cutoff? Well, it depends year to year. It's based around the number of students who take the test, which is roughly around 3,000. And from those 3,000, they usually read about the top 500 essays. They only read the top 500 multiple choice scorers, their essays. So what that means is, let's say that the 3,000 students who took the test, the top 500 scores were either a 78 out of 100 raw points or above. So that means that for that particular year, for that batch of students, you need to achieve a score of a 78 or higher in your raw point total in order to have your essay read. Now, once it comes down to that stage of reading your essay is the sole thing that will determine whether or not you get into Hunter. As in, it doesn't matter if you got an 80 or you got a 99. They're going to read your essay, and your essay is going to be the deciding factor to move on from those 500 students that have their essay read to the about 150 to 170 that get accepted every year. Does that make sense? So it's really a test which you can't really look at from a point of view of like, how can I quote unquote beat the test, right? Because it's calculated to have these kind of like milestones of checkpoints that every student needs to kind of reach. They're really looking for well-rounded students, not just students who are extremely good at essay writing or extremely good at math or extremely good at reading comprehension. Of course, that helps because it cushions your score to a certain degree. But remember that once you've reached that threshold for multiple choice, it's going to come down to your essay. All right. So I'm going to just clear the screen of these examples, and then we're going to move on forward to more specifics about each of the sections. So we've gone over a lot of this. And another thing I want to reiterate is what makes the Hunter test so unique is that it's not like a common core SHSAT, SAT, or ACT test. It's not a standardized test. Now, I've talked about this a lot over my years of tutoring for the Hunter test and outside of it. Standardized tests, and this is a personal belief of mine that I think is really important to understand how to kind of like go after standardized tests. Standardized tests at their very core fail as a concept. So let's understand what that means. So a standard is a agreed upon unit of measurement, right? Like a standard foot or a standard meter. We all understand how large that is, right? So for us, that's an agreed upon unit of measurement. But to use the same measuring stick to kind of try to evaluate everybody's intelligence doesn't really work. It always falls short. For example, if I have a student who plays a musical instrument that I've never played, their brain is literally wired differently. So to test our intelligence the same way doesn't really make sense. So that's where the standardized tests fall, right? And that's why, there's always holes in them and there's ways to kind of like circumvent what they're trying to do and figure out how to kind of conquer them. So they're a lot more conquerable. The Hunter test is different because it's not really standardized, right? Hunter itself has its own philosophy of first picking out a certain amount of students that they only want to take the test. And then besides that, the way the test itself is arranged, right? They look for skills in reading comprehension and math, but when you go to those reading comprehension questions or those math questions, you'll notice that those are not similar to what you all have been doing at school. It goes a bit beyond the page. So that's another way that they kind of are not part of the norm, right? They're not part of the standard. And then the last thing is this essay writing. One of the things about the essays is that it's usually a personal narrative in some degree, shape, or form where a student has to write about themselves. Now, even adults have a hard time writing about themselves, right? Anyone does. It feels strange to kind of talk about ourselves for an extended period of time to a stranger, to kind of like showcase our abilities and try to make ourselves seem desirable. But to do that in an essay in a timed fashion in a short period of time, and to also answer the questions that the essay is asking, that's a lot to do. And that's not something or a skill that's usually worked on in school in general. A lot of students usually, when they learn how to learn how to write like book summaries, or they learn how to write analytically, or they know how to write like a science report or a history paper. But this is very different. And so that's another realm in which, the test itself throws a wrinkle at that idea of a standardized test. And so these are all new skills that everyone here is going to be learning, right? And in order to learn those skills and strengthen them, it's really important that you kind of differentiate or unlearn bad habits so that you can work on building good habits. The reason why I call these habits and why it's so important to recognize them as such, and why even in sixth grade it's really important on how you build your foundation for these things, is because, I'm sure everyone here has had their kind of own issues with some bad habits that they've had in their life, and they're hard to break, right? So habits, good or bad, are hard to break. So it's better to form good ones rather than bad ones early on, right? And so if you come into the test thinking, oh, I'm just going to do what I've been doing at school because that's been successful, and you're hard-headed about that, you're not going to find success. You're going to have to rely on the team here at Queller, your tutors, and the other people that come to you during these workshops and try to give you this advice who've been through it to understand how this is different and then adapt accordingly. Okay? So that's just an overview of the test as a whole. We're going to now start diving into the sections in particular. So we're going to start off with the first section, which is language arts section or critical reading. Now, the reading comprehension is pretty familiar to most students, I would assume. It's in every kind of test that you've ever had. It's multiple choice. But the issue is that this time around, it's a lot more advanced. So it's more advanced than what most students have been doing in fifth or sixth grade. And the reason why I always bring up fifth and sixth grade is because, remember, most of you when you're taking the Hunter test, you're done with fifth grade. but you're still right in the crux or the middle of sixth grade. And sixth grade, goes at different paces for every school. And so it's not really a fair evaluation to be evaluating everyone in the middle of sixth grade, but that's just when the test is. So depending on what, if a sixth grade class started the poetry unit first and another one doesn't do it until the spring, one class will have an advantage over the other. And so that's why it's really important to remember that if you just know things or you feel comfortable with the fifth and sixth grade curriculum, you're going to fall short. You have to go beyond that. So in here, the other thing to keep in mind is there's a variety of genres, from stanzas, from a poem to dialogue to a memoir piece, but there will be overwhelmingly fiction excerpts. So there will be some nonfiction writing, but most of it is fiction. So one of the things is that the test as a whole, a lot of students are used to reading fiction on their own, but deciphering it in real time as you're reading is a skill that you need to build up through practice. The other thing is you need to get comfortable reading a lot of different types of material. So a lot of students that I've worked with in the past, they've had trouble with the poetry section just because it's not something that they read on their own time, which makes a lot of sense, right? I don't know a lot of fifth or sixth graders that go out of their way to read poetry often on their own. So that's something that they just need to become more familiar with. Now, the nice thing is that, the internet at our fingertips, we can go online, go to any resource that we find and read it. Another thing that I found very helpful when I was younger, and something that got me interested in different level of text as well, is when I was younger, I would read things that I was interested in, but written at a higher level. So like, I'm a huge basketball fan, so I would go read the sports section in the New York Times, right? Because I know that the New York Times writes it at a higher rate than like a kid's sports magazine would. And so that's kind of the way to get introduced into higher level vocabulary, understanding things. And, because it's something that I'm interested in, I will take the time to properly understand what was written. Okay. And so that's like another piece of advice here. The other thing is oftentimes, I know that this is multiple choice. And so parents see that, okay, look, I can help them read these things from other places like the New York Times, The Economist, other newspapers, whatnot. But I don't have the multiple choice questions to give the students. That's perfectly fine. I think rather it's try to have a discussion with them to see how much they understood and what they may have missed. And I feel like that's a good activity to work with at home, right? And we can take care of all of these things here in terms of helping them find the multiple choice questions and the proper passages that come with it. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move down. We're going to talk a lot more in reading in depth once we go over the reading section as a whole. But I'm going to move on to the math section now. So the math section is one where it's without the use of a calculator. So students have to be very comfortable with doing simple arithmetic, large numbers, multiplication, division, all of these things, computing that they have to be comfortable with, whether it's, regular integers, decimals, fractions, percentages, whatever it may be. These are just some of the topics that are covered: probability, division, multiplication rules, rates, averages, ratios, time, and money. A little bit of geometry, areas, perimeters, geometry, and numerical and visual patterns. And this is the thing I like to end with, because really what makes the Hunter math stand out is there's a base number of questions in the 30 that most students who are comfortable with math will succeed with. They'll find success in. But the questions that they won't, right? The questions that really matter, right? Let's say out of 30, let's say 20 of them are quote unquote easy, right? And straightforward, right? As in, these are things that students have seen before, or it's easy for them to understand once they understand the concept as a whole. The other 10 tricky questions, the reason why they're tricky is because they require a lot of outside the box thinking, in the sense that since this is a timed test, right? The faster you're able to do a question, albeit staying accurate, right? This is important, right? That you want to do things quickly, but you also want to keep your accuracy high. If you can do these questions in the fastest way possible, in the most efficient way possible, you will inherently have an advantage. So one of the things that, and I know that math is not the section I'm going over today, but I just want to show you all a very classic Hunter-like example, is if I asked a student to add all the numbers from 1 to 100, I can have a student sit here and say 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 4 is 10, and they'll keep on going on. And if I give the student about 20, 30 minutes, I'm sure they'll get to an answer eventually. And as long as they're being careful, they'll get to the right answer, right? Now, the issue is that that is not an efficient way to do it, because for that one question, that student is taking 20 minutes. That's not realistic in a test, right? Especially in a time test. So these are things that they may not have learned at school, but it's up to them to kind of understand and notice these patterns of here, let me just rewrite it so it's a little bit easier to see. If I did 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus dot dot dot, and let's go 99, 98 plus 99 plus 100, what's an easier way I could think of it is, well, we call this the rainbow method of taking the lowest and the largest number in our set that's consecutive. So 1 plus 100 will give us 101. 2 plus 99 will give us 101. And 3 plus 98 will give us 101. So we're noticing this pattern that arises of, hey, if we pair up every single number with the largest and the highest, or with the largest and the smallest, we're getting these pairs that sum to the same thing, 101. Now the next realization is, oh, so I'm adding 101 to itself 50 times. And then it's that recognition of, oh, 101 times 50 is the same thing. And I can multiply two numbers fairly quickly. And that'll save me a lot of time, as well as get me the accurate, correct answer, which is 50-50, right? 5,050. So that's one of the classic Hunter questions where they reward an efficient, quote unquote, smart test taker by being able to notice these patterns in these problems. And I think the mantra behind that is, I remember I think it was my first week of 7th grade at Hunter, and my math teacher at the time, he was the head of the math department. He's long since retired, but he told us, he explained to us that one of the things that makes human beings, quote unquote, one of the smartest species on this planet is their ability to use pattern recognition. And he gave us the simple idea of, like, think about the seasons, right? The seasons come in these patterns of, like, okay, after winter, it's going to be springtime, then it's going to be summer, and then it's going to be fall, and then that's going to signal to us that it's winter. So early humans realized that, hey, look, winter's coming, we need to start storing food, and that's what the fall time would be for, right? You harvest everything near the end of the summer, so you make sure you have enough, and so on and so forth. And so that simple idea of pattern recognition as being just like math to like the smallest, most, I guess, elementary degree really kind of stuck with us. And that's kind of why he pushed for, like, everything in math is discoverable to a certain degree. And that's probably the best way to think about it, is because a lot of the things on the test, sure, a lot of students, if they learn algebra earlier on, they'll have a lot of benefits, but you don't need it on the Hunter test in order to be successful, right? And it's more so about finding these general, easier kind of ways of doing hard problems just by looking for those patterns to begin with. And that's really kind of at its crux what Hunter math is really about. And so that idea of thinking outside the box is something that takes a lot of work, because students don't, right, if they're not used to thinking this way in school, it's a vastly completely different way of thinking that they need to get used to. And so that's one of the things that the classes here works on. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick look to see if anyone has any questions. Will the recordings be shared? Yes, the recordings will be shared. This document in itself that I'm writing on, I always love when parents and students take notes with me, and that's why I like to go at a very, I would say, middle of the pack pace, because it's better when you take notes directly on your own. It helps it stick better. But these notes will also be made available. I will share them with Ben and Ms. Queller, and I'm sure it'll be able to be distributed to anyone who needs it. Okay. I don't see any other questions here, so I'm going to continue moving forward. All right. So after the math section, we've talked about this a little bit before, it's just the essay. Now, the essay is the trickiest part of the test, I would say, to help students, because it's a few things. One is first teaching students how to write, right? When I was younger, one of the things I recognized early on, fully from my parents, was understanding that there are different writing styles that are appropriate for different jobs, right? So the way you would write a history paper is not the way you would write a story. And the way you would write a story is not the same way that you would write a analytical piece of a book. Nor is that similar to how you would write a summary of a book. Nor is it similar to how you would write an essay about yourself or a journal entry about what your day was like. So understanding that there are different ways to write that are effective in different aspects is really important. That's one. So with that recognition, the second thing that comes to mind is, like, well, what is the Hunter essay, right? They say that usually students are in my the word I use or the title that I give it is a personal narrative. So in some shape or form, they have to write about themselves, some kind of problem where they have to write about something that they've learned, something they've overcome, or a moment that's really important to the child. Now, once we go through, the basics of how to write, one of the big cruxes of Hunter writing itself is also writing descriptively using that idea of show don't tell, which I'm sure you all will hear more about in 2 days' time when there's the writing section is covered much more in depth and given a spotlight to. But I think the hardest part, regardless of all of that, students are able to master those tools over time. They're able to understand better and put them together in pieces. I think the hardest part of the Hunter test in general, without a doubt, is decision making for the essay. Because as we're practicing different essays, right? So I'll give you an example. One is in 2016, it's right here, students were asked to choose between two essay choices, and neither of them were New York City focused, right? Because sometimes they relate to New York City, sometimes they don't. So the essay is probably the most volatile of all the choices, of all the sections, in terms of how it changes year to year and how I guess Hunter keeps its applicants on their toes, right? But just from that alone, that decision to make students choose, that adds more variables into this entire equation, right? Because a student might think that one essay is hard for them, but with a little bit of talking to from either their tutor or their parents, right? They'll understand that, oh, I do have something to say about that other essay topic, and that one might have been easier for me to write about, right? So that's what's different about this. Sorry, I just looked over and I saw that one of the questions that someone had asked to me is it like the state test? It's not entirely like the state test because the state test often has to do with reading a passage, answering from that, and the state test is usually not as personal about a student. In recent years, Hunter has added it to the mix of where they would have a student read something, a passage that they've read before, something else, and then after that short reading, write about themselves in accordance to or in relation to that short reading, right? So if they write a story about a family who recently migrated to the United States, then they might say, this family brought over this thing that means a lot to them. And they might ask the student, just like this person in that story that you read, what is the family heirloom that means a lot to you and your family? Something like that. So that's one way that they've incorporated an outside text into the essay, but it's still very personal like, right? And I think one of the reasons why they do that is Hunter doesn't have an interview portion to their application. So asking something personal gives them at least some insight as to what the student values and what they like and what they don't. So that's one. The other thing is going back to that idea of decision making. I'll give you a very good example. A student of mine in the past, their essay topic was to write about their favorite place in New York City. Now, this student thought, hey, everyone is going to write about something that's very quote unquote basic, right? Like things that, they're going to hear about a park, they're going to hear about the library. So he wanted to stand out. And so he wrote about the hospital where he was born, right? And the reason why that doesn't really work is because that student had been to that hospital only twice in his life. One time when he had broke his arm, he was, I think, 4 or 5 years old. And then another time when he was born, he was way too young to remember anything. So writing about things you don't know is always kind of setting yourself up for failure, right? The way I tell students and I explain this to students is, hey, look, one of the biggest franchises in literature is the Harry Potter series. Now it's a completely fantastical world, right? We all know it's fiction, but we're so enthralled by it that we create like these theme parks behind it. We really get into it, all of it, as much as we can. But we know that entire work is fiction. And if that writer has that ability as a writer to be able to do that to people, we're not at that level yet. So let's not try to write about things we don't know. Let's try to write about things we do know, right? At the same time, I understand that, no one's going to come knocking to your house and asking your child, did this really happen to you or anything like that? So there is room for embellishment. But the way I've kind of compromised that or help students understand how to compromise that is, say that some incident, you play tennis, and some instance of tennis has been difficult for your friend, but not for you. Well, you can borrow your friend's experiences because they're still within the realm of tennis, and tennis is something you understand. Does that make sense? So that's the room of embellishment you have, is you can write about the concept of tennis, something that you definitely know, right? Without completely, I guess, being honest in this case of like that experience didn't happen to you, it happened to your friend of yours. And so that's kind of the way you can go about it. But this is what I mean by the hardest part of the test is decision making, right? If I was that student in that test where they asked me to write about, my favorite place, I would write about something I know. I wouldn't write about the hospital just to stand out, right? And remember that this essay writing portion is within the 3 hours, so they need to have enough time, right? And let's say there are 3 sections on the test. You give an hour to each section. In this hour for the essay, you need to both be able to think of an idea, plan it out effectively, write it, and then do your best to proofread it and make sure it's as clean as possible before you hand it in, right? All within that hour's time. That's a lot of things to do. And so that's something that takes practice, takes time. But at the same instance, I want everyone here to remember that whenever you're writing an essay for a test, even the essay reader understands that this is your best version. This is your best attempt at a first draft, right? So what matters the most are your ideas and your organization, right? If you have 1 or 2 spelling mistakes, that's fine. But if every third word is misspelled, that's not a good sign, right? If you have 1 grammar problem, that's okay, that's forgivable. But if every other sentence is a run-on, then we have bigger issues at play here, right? So being a writer is about having that all-purposeful toolbox that you need to be able to take advantage of, right? And if you don't have that, that's what we're here to work on, help get the students acquainted with the tools that are needed to be a good writer. And then the hardest part is helping them understand how to make that decision making of, hey, what are the things that I have to write about in my toolbox, and how can I focus on them? Right? How can I continue to go through them the way that I should, so that it's doable for me? One of the exercises that I know that has been helpful is helping students prep. So when I've worked with students in the past, more so on a one-on-one basis, I've helped them literally pick up topics that almost work for any kind of essay. And so, like if you have, for example, this is a famous example that I use often, is if I have an essay topic that says, write about an everyday object that means a lot to you, I write about like my grandfather's pen. And so my grandfather's pen as a concept works not just for that essay, but it also works for, write about someone who you admire. And I would say my grandfather, right now, and I would talk about the pen that he gave to me when he passed away, and how, it reminds me of like what he used to do as a journalist. And that pen was very important to him. Or another one is like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I could just talk about my grandfather's pen as a jumping off point to become a journalist or a writer, right? So that one concept works for multiple essays. So the reason why I think that's a good practice to do or think about for your child or for any of the students is because what happens is it minimizes the number of decisions they have to make, or it lets them choose from a pool of essays that have been tried and true in terms of topics that work for multiple types of essays. That's really it. The other thing is that having that list of familiar places and memories that they can draw upon will make it easier on test day under pressure for them to, think of the right topic to write about without taking too much time trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Okay. Sorry, so that was a lot on essay writing. Let me move on to scoring and selection now. So in terms of, we've kind of gone through the numbers already. So roughly there's been about 3,000 students who take the test who get invited to. About 500 of the top multiple choice scorers then move on to the round to have their essays read. And out of the 500, there's about 150 to about 170 students that get accepted solely based off the essay. And that number, depends on, of course, how many students are staying at Hunter, who come up from the elementary school, who will join them in the high school class or not. Hunter also, and this is important, maintains a wait list for about 20 to 30 students. And that's only if an admitted student declines admission or withdraws from Hunter prior to the beginning of 7th grade, then the students will be offered, placement out of the wait list. To my knowledge, there's no way for a parent to figure out where in the wait list their child is, nor do I know how they determine where the child is. I don't know if it's based off the multiple choice score, whether the essay received a score higher than the others, but that's kind of like what they maintain. It is very rare for a child to be taken off the wait list and to join Hunter. I think at most one or two do every in a year. I've never heard of more than two students moving off from the waitlist into gaining admissions in the same year. And that's about it. But remember that as soon as the session starts, as soon as seventh grade starts for the child and they were on the wait list, that means that they're no longer on the wait list. The wait list is dissolved as soon as the seventh grade classes taken into account. Even if a child leaves after the first week of school, they won't be replaced with another student from the wait list. Yeah. Okay. Before I move on to reading comprehension, does anyone have any questions that they need answered? Please feel free to write it in the chat. I'm keeping my eyes there on just in case as well. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to reading comprehension because that's what today is all about. Okay. So this is probably, excuse me, one of my most, I think, core classes that I teach in terms of at Queller, regardless of what the student is doing, whether it's for the Hunter test, whether it's for the LSAT, the GMAT, the SAT, the ACT, reading comprehension does not go away. So I think it's very important in going back to that idea of habits to understand how to approach reading comprehension. And so that's the first thing that we're going to look at today is kind of like what's the best mentality or kind of methodology behind going after reading comprehension. So the first thing I'll ask is, do you think that, sorry, I just got a few more questions there. Sorry. So let me actually answer these questions before I jump in. How much essays will there be? One or more? So there's usually just been one essay on the test, and that's the one that they need, that they check and read. How much do you need to pass the test overall? What if you do well on everything else, but do not do so well on the math? So as we've talked about before with the raw points, you need to get a certain amount of raw points to have your essay read, right? So let me just go back and I'll run through that example one more time. So here I talked about the top 500 multiple choice scorers. So there are 50 reading comprehension questions and 30 math. And these are both out of 50 raw points. So each question here is worth 1, but each question here is worth 5/3 of a raw point. So each math question is weighed a little bit more, right? And so out of 100, and they make out of 100 points. Now, let's say, and this again changes year to year because of how the students as a collective do. So to be in the top 500 multiple choice scores, let's say that this year's cutoff was a 78. That means that everyone who got a 78 or higher will be admitted to have their essay read, right? Once the 78 is taken care of, once those 500 multiple choice scores are chosen, the only thing that will matter is the essay itself. So they're going to read the essay. Hunter has its own rubric for the essay. They look for organization. They look for whether the student has answered the question being asked. They look for grammar to a certain degree. They look for the overall story. They look for if the student's essay is well written, is it unique, is it original, all of these things, right? But remember, keep in mind that they're also looking for the best possible first draft, right? So once that's taken care of, multiple choices out the window, and from the essays, they choose the 150 to 170 essays. The essays are read by current Hunter College High School teachers, and the essays are not attached with the name, just an applicant ID number. So it's completely blind in terms of they don't know who wrote what. So then the next question was to double check anyone who is still on the waitlist during the start of the school year is removed. Yes. So if it's, let's say school starts September 5th, if September 12th, a student who has started at Hunter decides they don't want to stay there, they go back to their local public school, they leave Hunter, that's fine. Another student from the waitlist will not come and join that class. Could you still get accepted if you didn't get your essay read? No, the essay is the deciding factor. So if you got a perfect score in the multiple choice, but your essay did not meet the mark that it needed to, you will not be admitted into school. What is a good score for the essay to be read? So a good score historically has been around this 75 to 80, that cutoff. I would like to always aim a little bit higher just to be safe on the side of things. But remember that year to year, it changes based off how that pool of students do. What are the main topics organized in what are the main topics organized in broad categories for the essays? Well, that's the thing. The essay question changes year to year, but historically, it seems like the direction that Hunter has been moving in has been to be more like college admissions essays. And so we have at Queller a list of essays that have both showed up on the Hunter test in the past, as well as many essays that are similar to it, just with a different wrinkle. And so it has happened in the past where, we've predicted like very closely to what the essay could be, and it has been the case. Let me just scroll down a little bit more. Do you need to show your work for math? You don't need to show your work. We of course highly recommend it. There is no partial credit because the entirety of the math and ELA section is multiple choice. So it's based off of Scantron. You bubble it in. That's how it goes. Is it required for the student to finish the whole test within the time limit? It's not required by any means, right? But it's all about chances, right? So if you have 80 questions on the test and you've only answered 40 of them, chances are of you getting all 40 right, and then also meeting the cutoff, and then also having your essay read are much, much lower, right? So that's where I would say that it's not required by any means, but you better your chances if you finish the entire test and do a good job on it. Will you be able to carry a watch when taking the test? Yes, as long as it's not making any noise, you can carry a watch. That won't be an issue. Will the test be on paper? Yes. How hard is the Hunter test? That is a very subjective question. I would say that it's harder than what most students do at school, and it's definitely harder than the state test. I have never heard of a student just going into the Hunter test blindly and being okay. That doesn't really. They must have some kind of prep or have looked at least this model test online or something to get an idea. As far as I know, it's in written form, but I'm not sure if there are accommodations. I'm sure there are for if a computer is needed. Will the math have word problems as well, or is it just multiple choice? So the math will have word problems, but the answers will be in multiple choice. So the math question, regardless of whether it's in a long word problem form or if it's just a simple computation, will still be multiple choice. What if you don't finish within the time limit? Well, if you don't finish within the time limit, they will just take what you have done and grade you based off that. Are phones allowed? Phones are not allowed, nor is a calculator. Will they allow an Apple Watch or disallow it because of its calculator? They will most likely disallow an Apple Watch. So if you can carry the watch, it can't be a smartwatch, right? That is correct. Approximate score my child gets in their KPSS I can get through, just an idea. Okay, so in my experience from teaching the classes, most of the students, and this is the other part, right? That when you get a result from Hunter, it usually doesn't tell you how you did in terms of like, was your essay read or not, unless you have a pool of different students, going through it. So one thing that they used to do, and this is many years ago, of course, because this is when I took the test, they would tell you what your score was only if you did not get it. So for example, let's say that, and they would tell you the cutoff, let's say that the cutoff was an 82, and they said, sorry, you got an 80, that means they never read your essay. Sorry, the cutoff was an 84, an 82, and you got an 84, but you were not gained admission, that means they read your essay and your essay didn't make the mark. They have since changed that to just tell you whether or not you were accepted or not. And I'm just going through a few more questions. Will the test be in person on campus or in our homes? The test will be in person on campus. The Hunter test is usually taken at 3 locations. One is the Hunter College High School itself, the campus school on 94th between Park and Madison. And the other one is at Hunter College, but I say that those are 2 locations because there's 2 different entrances for those 2. In my experience with the scores for the essays at Queller, it's been usually around, and this is very important, the last few weeks leading up to the test to consistently get 8s or higher. That's a very good shot of your essay being strong. Consistency is really important, right? Because students write a variety of essays, and it's important that, that they write it both in the test and for homework, and that you have consistency in both, right? Because some students do well in their homework essays, but that's because they're much more relaxed. It's not while also having to juggle the multiple choice. And then their test essays are not as great. What if only 300 students got a 78? Would they read essays? So remember that the cutoff is set by the 500 multiple choice test scores. So if only 300 students got a 78, then the cutoff is not 78, right? It's a lot lower because they need 500 essays to read. So it's only multiple choice in an essay. Yes, it's only multiple choice in an essay. How much time for each section? So this is the other part of the equation, right? You're not given each section timed, you're given 3 hours to handle everything. Yeah. I believe you can start whenever, wherever you're given it all at once. Yes, you're given a booklet which has everything at it, and so different students have tried different strategies where they'll do the math first, then they'll do reading, and then they'll do the essay, or they'll do math first, then the essay, then reading, or they'll just go in order of the test. Will breaks be allowed, or is it 3 hours straight? It is 3 hours straight. Approximately what essay score can assure you to pass? Well, that's the thing, right? It all depends on how. This is the thing I really love to think about is in the world I can't really I can't really control how other people do, but I can control how I do, right? So the essay score that I'm aiming for every single time is trying to get a 10 out of 10, right? So you look at the rubric that we've taught the students here, and all the things that they need to work on, which is one, are you using descriptive language? Is your essay about you? Are you answering the question being asked? Does your essay show clear organization? Are you using transitions? Is your vocabulary higher than just an average fifth or sixth grader? Is your essay void of spelling and grammar mistakes for the most part? Those are the things that you're trying to replicate every time, and I would stick with that basis of getting an 8 or higher consistently from Queller that have shown up to be successful for the students that do end up gaining admission. Do the ELA and math sections separate from the essay part in terms of time frame? No. So students can, incorporate the 3 hours is very valuable. So it's based off of how they want to organize their time. When will they tell you where you will take the exam? So the day that they release the tickets will tell every single student where they're supposed to show up. What happens if less than 100 students get their essay read? So remember, that's not a possibility because 500 students set the cutoff score for the multiple choice to have their essays read. Which part of the test is hardest? I think this depends on which part is hardest for you, but it also is important to recognize that from my perspective, with all the students that I've worked with over the years, I found that getting someone to perfect their essay, not even just the writing aspect of it, but the decision-making aspect of it is the hardest part. Let me see when they will tell me about where I will take the exam. So they'll tell you where you take the exam when they release the admission tickets. How much time do you need for the ELA and math portions? We like to usually tell students an hour in each section is a good rule of thumb. Will there be time reminders? There are time reminders. Now, how often that may be, I think it depends. Usually, I think they go by an hour, and then in the last hour, it's like 30 minutes, 15 minutes left, 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. What is the most important thing to know about the test to enter? Just like anything else, I would say that the most important thing is to know about the test is the more prepared you are, the more successful you will be. So the more practice you do, the more chance you have of gaining admission. Will they tell you results on the letter that decides if you get accepted? So I think they've stopped releasing results completely. They used to do that on the past. Based on past tests, what was the average score that students got that was a passing score? I think usually it's been around a 75 to like an 85, like somewhere within that. I don't think it's ever reached as high as an 85, but I know that in years past it was like a 78. I know that when I took the test looked very different when I took it. It was a lot longer. It was 120 questions. The cutoff score was a 72. So I think it changes here and there, but since I've been working here at Queller, I think it's been around an 80. Normally people take 1 hour per section, so 2 hours for the questions. Yes. Are abbreviations allowed on the essay? No, you should not be writing out abbreviations. You should be spelling things out. The other reason why is because not everyone will know the abbreviation that you may be using. Who will be watching us when taking the test? Usually the proctors are also Hunter College High School teachers. What grade level is most of the test? That's hard to say. It's a good mixture. The math that we've talked about is more so contest level math, even though it might be I guess advertised as sixth grade, but it's not necessarily. If I do one question and get it right, will they read my essay? No, they won't. Will they tell you what score you get in order to get an essay scored? How many questions do you need to get correct? So it's not about how many questions you need to get correct. It's about the raw points. What do I mean by underlining that the decision is the hardest part of the essay? Decision about what specifically? So the decision is, what do I mean by, okay, so these are the last two questions I'll take just for the sake of time and because we still have a lot of things to cover. So the second to last question is, what do I mean by underlining that the decision is the hardest part of the essay? Decision about what specifically? So if I work with a student long enough, I can teach them all the things that they need to know about writing, the tools in terms of like how to start an essay, how to end an essay, what's a good conclusion, transitions, and all of these things, right? So the hardest portion of it, right, is I can't tell the student what to write about, right? So, for example, the example that I have used is, for example, my younger brother is the one was the student that I was talking about earlier who had his Hunter College high school admission test essay was to write about his favorite place in New York City. Wanting to stand out, he wrote about the hospital where he was born. Now, that's not a good enough essay topic, or that decision was not good enough because he doesn't know the hospital that well, right? But his thinking was, hey, everyone else is going to write about parks and the library and Starbucks or all these other places they go with their friends. But I think I'll stand out because I'll be different. I'll be unique. Now, he wrote the essay, right? And he's a good writer. So that's not an issue, right? The issue is that the topic he picked, it wasn't going to be as good of an essay or as descriptive or as relatable or something that's going to be passionate enough for the reader to read because the decision he made in choosing to write about the hospital was not a good one. Does that make sense? That's what I mean by the underlying decision is the hardest part. I can help a student figure out how to write. I can even give them a list of things to write about, right? And that was one of the other exercises that I worked with a lot of students on is, hey, let's try to get your list of items. Like, let's get this toolbox ready of things that you can write about. But the issue is I can't, on the test, the day of the test, be behind them and say, hey, don't write about that topic or don't, or write about this topic. And neither will Miss Queller be there nor any of the parents. So that decision in the middle of the test is completely up to the child. And that decision making is something that they need to work for, right? And they need to work on, right? And I would say that's the hardest thing for students to recognize. Okay, if I do one question, get it right, will they read my essay? No, they won't because you have one raw point, and if the cutoff is 78, then that's not gonna get you there. Will they get that list in classes to work for essay topics? I believe so, but I mean, the list is created by the child itself, right? Because it's a list of their experiences, right? It's not a list that's given like, hey, every kid can write about these things, right? It depends on the child. So one of the, and I'm sure like when the essay, because today is, I'm doing an overview of the test, but my main focus is going to be reading comprehension right after this, and that's what we're going to move into shortly. Is on not tomorrow because I believe tomorrow's math. On the third day, right, of this series, you all will focus more so on the essay. Okay. All right. With that being said, I'm going to take a pause in questions, and we're going to move on to reading, right? And so reading is really important because I'm going to tell you all about what has made me a successful test taker in reading comprehension from the Hunter test all the way till. So one of the other things is I haven't really properly introduced myself in terms of like what I do and what I've, besides being a tutor for uh, so many years in New York City, it's that, I have taken almost every level of testing that has reading comprehension in it, right? So whether that be, the Hunter test or, the law school admission test, the medical college admission test, whatever may be, at every single level, reading comprehension, like these tactics have helped me be successful in them. So that's what I want to share with all of you today, right now. And I may dispel some myths or some preconceptions that people may have about reading comprehension right now. So I think, whenever I do that, people get a little, riled up to think about like, wait, why is this method better than another? Or so on and so forth. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and start with the bare essentials, how to read. Okay. This part I really, really will appreciate if you all can follow along as well as probably take notes. Okay. Because I think that's really important. Because it helps let the information here stick with you if you're able to. Okay. So the two parts of reading comprehension come down to two sections. One is the reading, and the second is the questions. Right? So there's two portions to it, right? You have to obviously read the passage, and then you have to deal with the questions themselves. Okay. So first off, and I think this is really important, whenever I've asked this question in the past, parents have usually gone the other way, and they haven't said this, so I'll ask everyone here again. When you do a passage, should you read the questions first or should you read the passage first? I'm just curious to see kind of like what pops up in chat, just to see like what people say as an answer. So I'll repeat the question again. When doing reading comprehension, do you read the passage first or questions first? So this never fails. In terms of, excuse me, the majority always say questions first, so you know what to look for specifically in the passage. So I will say, and this has always been my mantra, and I have found an immense amount of success behind this. Read the passage first, not the questions. And I will explain why I believe that so strongly and why, throughout time, over the thousands of students that I've worked with, this has been true. This has helped them gain a higher score every single time. So what happens is, especially when you have a younger student, this is especially true when you have a younger student, but it's also true once you're working with someone older. When someone reads the questions first, they become hyper fixated to finding the answers to those questions. So of course there are some simple questions, right? So that you can go back and find like, oh, why did Bob go to the store? Oh, Bob went to the store to pick up supplies for Annie's birthday party. Cool, right? Those are easy to follow along. They're in the passage directly. We can figure them out. That's nothing complicated. But when it starts to ask you questions from different parts of the passage and how they relate to one another, because you've been so busy reading details, you haven't gained the scope of the passage as a whole, of how everything connects. And so in order to answer that question confidently, what you're going to do is you're going to read the passage again. And by reading it again, you have now wasted time, right? Whereas you could have just read it once and answered both questions right away. And as we get to higher level tests, right? Like we move past the Hunter test and we get to an SAT level test, or we get to like the MCAT level test, that's where this strategy falls apart, because they're not just simple detail questions. They're asking you about things that are happening in the whole. And by ignoring something, you're getting pushed down in terms of having to read it again and waste more time. And as you get older, the amount of time you have for the section actually decreases, because reading more quickly, understanding things more quickly is part of the entire thing of reading comprehension. So I always say read the passage first, not the questions. I will add to this that you don't read, you skim. And so this is an art that I work with students a lot, right? Don't read, skim. Skimming, what that really means is you want to focus on the major details and you ignore the minor ones. So I'll give you another example. So in my example of Bob going to the store to buy things for Annie's birthday party, I don't really care for what Bob is buying, right? What are the supplies to the birthday party? Because it's a list. And if I read the passage again, or if I just make a little annotation next to it, I know where it is. I can go back and just look through that line number really quickly to see what he bought. But I need to know why he went there, the purpose. So that's the difference between a major detail and a minor one, right? And recognizing that is really important, because it's going to help you become you're going to be better equipped to think like the test maker, so you understand what kind of questions are coming up. Okay. So speaking of that, the other thing that I had just mentioned is to annotate. Now, when someone annotates, these are what I mean by annotating. You only need it only needs to make sense to you. So if someone were to pick up my paper that I wrote for the Hunter test in terms of how I marked it up, they might not understand any of my annotations. And that's perfectly fine, because no one really cares what you've annotated. For the multiple choice, they're going to only look at your Scantron. They're going to only see if you got the questions right or wrong. So for that reason, it doesn't need to make sense to anyone else but you, because the whole reason you're annotating is it is done for yourself. It's to help you understand the passage, no one else. As long as it helps you get the questions right, It doesn't matter if your annotations are not full-length words. It doesn't matter if they're just images, if they look like hieroglyphics, whatever it may be. Also, as you annotate, you don't want to highlight the entire passage. That's useless, right? That's not helpful. So as you annotate, remember these two acronyms. The first one is DID, which means dumb it down. So I'll read something and I'll just say, was this positive or negative? Happy face or smile or sad face, right? Was this something that made the narrator feel good or bad? So simplify, right? Dumb it down. And the other one is KISS, which stands for keep it simple and short. A lot of other parents here might know it as something else, but that's what I go with when I'm teaching the sixth graders. So keep it simple and short. And in both cases, the it that I'm talking about is the passage, because your annotations are about the passage. Okay. And your annotations should be happening pretty often. It should be paragraph to paragraph, except, here's the exception, this doesn't really happen on the Hunter test, except when a paragraph is too long or too complex / complicated. So I've seen with older students that when they're studying for the SAT and they come across a passage written in the 1800s, what ends up happening is that they don't really understand what's going on when they're reading the passage too quickly. So I tell them, slow down, cut the paragraph in half, and annotate it, translate it into modern English so you can understand it better, and then annotate based off that. And that's where they found a lot of success. Now, the next part that I'm going to get into is a little off topic. It's going to seem at first, but it'll make a lot of sense. So we're going to actually switch up the scenario over here for a second. So someone asked, what kind of things do we annotate if we don't know the questions? So I'll show you exactly what are the things we're going to annotate. So the first thing I'm going to do right now, just so everyone has an idea, is I'm going to teach you all what are all of my techniques for reading. Then we're going to actually apply those techniques together on sample test 1 from the Hunter test. Okay. It's 7:04 p.m. right now. We will be done at 8 p.m. All right. So first I'm going to go off topic a little bit to help you understand this next thing. Okay. Imagine this is my class of, 147 participants, and I'm your history teacher teaching you all about the Civil War. And let's say this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This is week 1, and this is week 2. And so every day here, I have lessons on the Civil War. Let's break it down here. Civil. Okay. And then we have 2 days worth of review, and then it's the test. Okay. So let me explain what's happening, just so everyone understands. For week 1, I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and week 2, 7 days worth of lessons on the Civil War. Then in this class, we're doing 2 days of review, and then finally it's test day on Friday. Okay. As students, if you all see that this teacher is spending 3 days on the Battle of Gettysburg and 1 entire review day on the Battle of Gettysburg, as a student who's paying attention, as a student who is trying their best in school, what does that tell you about what's going to be on the test? It tells you that the Battle of Gettysburg is going to be it's going to be a big chunk of the test in general. Does that make sense? Without the teacher even saying it, because you know that the teacher spent so much time on it. In a very similar fashion, and this has never not happened, if a passage keeps on repeating the same things, keeps on emphasizing the same things, that should signal out to you that it is going to be a question. It is important. Pay attention. That's what we have to annotate. Does everybody understand that? So when you become very skilled at reading comprehension, when you recognize this as fact, that this is going to happen, that this is how people create tests in general, right? Because one of the other things that I've done in the past is I've written questions for the SAT, right? And so test making in general is not, it's not a skill that's just, set off for one specific test. It stays universal. You have to understand why they're creating things the way they are. And once you do, as a test taker, it becomes a lot easier because what you'll be able to do is you're going to be able to predict questions that you already know the answers to. And that's what this next bullet point here is about. And that's why I had to go on that tangent to help you understand that. And that's what I tell students as well, that one of the way you know you're becoming a better reading comprehension test taker is you're able to predict questions that you already know the answers to, because that's how you're thinking, right? You're thinking in the mind of a test maker once they read a passage. So you've already predicted the question, and because you're paying attention, you've also predicted the answer, right? And that's why this is really important. This is a very important skill, and it's not something that people get good at overnight. It takes a lot of practice, right? All right, I'm just going to go ahead and erase all of this since this is technically off topic, but it was just to help illustrate that idea of being able to predict questions that you already know the answers to by looking at what the passage emphasizes. Right? You have to ask yourself, what does the passage or the author of this passage, what does the passage emphasize? Okay. All right. The other thing we're going to talk about here is, especially in passages, because the Hunter test has a lot of this, where it has a lot of dialogue and it has a lot of stories, prose. Always pay attention to POV, which stands for point of view. And here are the types of point of view and the hints to look out for in the passages. So for first person, you look out for I, me. For second person, you can look out for you or we. And for third person, it would be he, she, they, him, her, them. So these are just some ways to figure out what's going on in terms of this is the point of view that this passage is written in. You also want to always pay attention to changing points of view, because that's really important, right? There's a shift happening in the narrative. Whenever things shift, that's another way to predict questions that you already know the answers to, because that's something being emphasized. Okay. So far, we're just doing just the reading parts of it. By the way, this is the bare essentials for reading. As you're reading, you should remember all of these things. With poetry, there's excuse me. With poetry, there's a few more things added, and we'll talk about that when we do a poetry passage, if we can get to one. But I do want to move on to the question side of things and how you're supposed to be answering the types of questions that you have. But before we get into that, does anyone have any questions on just this aspect of it, just the reading aspect of it, before I move on? Okay. All right, great. Thank you all for being so patient. Let's move on to the question side of it. So again, I'm going to start off. It might seem like a little bit off topic or not fully engaged with the Hunter test, but my whole thing is I like to go from broad to specific, because I think that that's most helpful. The other thing is, if I'm being 100% realistic, I want every single student to try their best and their hardest on the Hunter test. Will every child get in? No, right? And the reason why is there's just not enough seats, right? That's the thing. But I think this is so insanely important, is to get a child used to the idea of test taking and to not have it something that they can be afraid of, right? Because preparation never stops, right? There's always a test to look forward to. And you can take this from the person who took, the Hunter test, the SHSAT, the SSAT, the PSAT, the ACT, the SAT, the MCAT, the GMAT, the LSAT. Basically, if there's a bunch of letters in the English language that make up a test, I probably touched it at the very least if I haven't taken it. Do you know what I mean? So I know that preparation, right? There's always something forward, and so you got to be able to get used to this idea of like, hey, preparing is something that's going to be good for me in the long run, right? And this idea of building habits is really important. What is second person in detail? It's you or we. So second person is when the reader is, when the author is talking to the reader and making them included in the way that they're presenting their ideas. Yeah. Okay. Oh, off topic. Does being overconfident on the test harm you? You know what? I'll address the idea of confidence near the end. I promise I'll get to that. And remind me if I don't. Okay. Alrighty. So we're going to move on to the question side because there still is a lot more to write, and I want you all to get all of these notes as well. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time because I know that we will have to end at 8. Okay. All right. So if you'll bear along with me, first I'm going to start off with just what are all the types of questions that appear on the test, right? So I'm just going to list some of them out. There's inference questions. There's detail questions. There's vocabulary and context questions. There's main idea. Of course, there's cause and effect. There's not/except questions. So those sound like which of the following was not mentioned in the passage, or all the following was mentioned in the passage except which one. There's even line number or paragraph number questions, right? Basically, they're like asking the reader to go back to a very specific spot within the passage. Now, regardless of what type of question there may be, right, the important thing to keep in mind is all of these types of questions need to be answered in the same way. So if there's a passage about, let's say, the House on Mango Street, right? It's a very popular book that's been read for students around the 6th, 7th grade age. So if some students have read that and other students have not, and our passage is about that book, right? So it's a chapter from that book. Is one student inherently at an advantage over the other? Well, at first glance, it may seem like yes, the student who's read it in class is definitely going to have an advantage. I would argue that no, it's pretty fair. The reason why is because remember that all of the questions are not going to be based about the book as a whole, but they're going to be based about that excerpt, right? Just the part that's from the book that they're using currently. So that's important, one. So someone who's read the book might know too much where it's harmful because they're going to be answering questions as if they've read the whole book, not as if they're using evidence just solely from the excerpt that's been provided on the test. And that has happened before. So it's really important that when you go into a test, you only rely on the information that the test gives you, right? So that's the way that they make things fair, right? All of these types of questions that I've listed out here, the key thing to remember is they all must be answered using passage-based evidence. Which means that if you use outside knowledge to answer a question, you're actually doing more harm for yourself than good. Even if it's something as simple as, oh, I've already read this book, so I should be at an advantage. Okay. All right. As we move on to the next rung on the ladder of this is the hardest part of reading comprehension, or your worst enemy in reading comprehension, this is going to sound terrible, is you. And here's the reason why. So you are your own worst enemy in reading comprehension. And it's due to doubt. And this has happened way too many times. I've seen it happen to students all the time. There's 4 answer choices. Okay, it's not A. Oh, B sounds good. C is definitely not the answer. Wait, D doesn't sound bad either. Is it B? Is it D? Is it B? Is it D? Is it B? Is it D? And you pick D. And what was the answer? It was B. So this idea of being stuck between two answer choices and picking the one that you didn't originally go with is probably the number one reason people get questions wrong on the test. Right? They're able to narrow down the answer choices down to the two. One of them is right, the other one's wrong, and they're unable to get to which one's the right answer. And one of the big reasons why that's the case is because of doubt. Excuse me. And the other one is that they don't have the right tools, right? And so that's what I'm going to help you all understand now is how do I get to the right tools? So here are some of them. Important things to remember as you're doing this, right? An answer is not correct even if it is true. Sorry, even if it is true. Because even if it's true, it must answer the question being asked. If it's an off topic answer, it's going to be wrong. So what ends up happening is a lot of students just pick a factual answer once they're stuck between two instead of thinking critically of like which one is doing a better job of answering the question being asked. Another thing is if part of an answer, if part of an answer choice is false, it's untrue, then the whole answer is wrong. If you have your favorite drink in the world in front of you, and there's a little bit of dirt in it or something gross in it, you're not going to drink it. You're going to throw the whole thing out, right? It's the same concept. If an answer choice has been poisoned by something that is factually incorrect, it's immediately wrong, even if the second half of that answer choice sounds great. So cross it out. Okay. Let's go down to the next one. This is another one of my favorites. Extreme answers. So let's actually review quickly what an extreme answer is. So, yes, I'll go back and explain what the not/except question is. We'll definitely go up to that again, and that's when I'll make it clearer for sure. Extreme answers. Okay, again, I'm going to go a little bit off topic. It'll make sense once I'm done with it. So let's say, since the beginning of my life, literally from the day I was born, every single Thursday I've gone to the bank. Somehow I've just ended up at the bank, right? Even during the pandemic, like on Thursdays I snuck into the bank. I don't know, right? Is the statement Mo has gone to the bank every single Thursday of his life true? If I have, right, then yes, it's obviously true. If I told you that, yeah, I've gone to the bank every single Thursday of my life during the pandemic, I would sneak into the bank, whatever, like it's 100% going to be true, right? Now, if I go to the bank every single Thursday of my life, except for one day, I miss one Thursday, is the statement Mo has gone to the bank every single Thursday of his life true anymore? It's not. And all it took was one exception. Does everybody understand that? Right? So that's what an extreme answer is. It's things that use the words like must, right, instead of may. Right? That's how you can recognize them. So I've done this exercise with my students before, back when I taught the SAT. I told them, hey, I'm going to read a passage. I won't read a passage. I'm just going to go after the questions without reading the passage at all. And I can already tell you which question answers are going to be wrong immediately, just because they have extreme words in them. And I was able to, because that's how the test is created, right? And like I said, if you can get into the mind of a test maker, you will find the most amount of success as a test taker. Of course, you have to understand the basics, right? But once you do, the way you go from that near perfect score to a perfect score is to get into the mind of the test maker themselves, right? To understand why is the test created this way? What are the traps that they're trying to create for us, right? How can I avoid them, right? So I want you all to pay pay very close attention to what I'm going to write here. So extreme answers are almost always wrong, and or extreme answers are almost never right. And the reason why I love to write it this way is because these are examples of answer choices that have extreme language in them. So it's not necessarily weird words, right? Always and never are not weird. It's just that they can be proven wrong very easily with just an exception. Does that make sense? The other thing to keep in mind is there is an exception to extreme answers being right. Remember what we said, the passage is law, right? So extreme answers can be proven wrong easily. But the exception is if the passage itself uses the word always and never, then you know for a fact that the answer can have always or never. It's very unlikely, but that is the only time that that's allowed. All right. So I hope the extreme answer thing is clear to everyone. Okay, so someone's trying to think of other strategies. Could I read through
Someone's in the chat. Do you want me to read the questions here really fast or no? The question is, could I read through all the questions and mark wrong and extreme answers and read the passage and make you kind of could if someone, right? I mean, Mo, you could answer that. The thing is, should you eliminate super extreme answers first? And that's quite a mature hack, but yes, I think that's a yes. And Mo can go through that with you.
Yeah, I mean, for 100%, I agree with that. The issue is, remember that for most of you, right? I'm imagining everybody here is in 6th grade, right? And they're preparing to take the test. For most of you, you barely have the skills, the basics down yet. So to move to that level is a huge jump, in my opinion. And that's what I'm always afraid of, right? I'm here to find the most efficient way of doing things. But if you can't grasp it at this level, what can backfire is you start marking questions wrong that really aren't that extreme. Do you understand what I mean? That's really the issue here.
Can I add to it? I want to give you one. So something that I like to eliminate also right away as like a super strategy. By the way, I've taken the LSAT, I've taken the bar exam, I run the tutoring company. So, and I'm also a lawyer. In case you don't know, I'm a woman of skills. I nothing's suable. So, for example, any comment that'll get you sued or super offend. So, for example, a statement like "all chain smokers will die," and then like you really don't want a situation where like chain smokers united come and sue you. So something along those lines is always a no. Any statement that is just very suable and highly offensive is a no. So, and offensive to a group is a no. So that's super a no. And I don't know, the same goes for the college essay, which is not on this. In the essay, by the way, you also don't want to make statements like this. Smoking is bad. Chain smoking is worse. All chain smokers will die. Like statements like that are just not right and offensive. And I would avoid any of those extreme yes, no, 100% yes, no, absolute wording types. Anyway, I'm going to go back on mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, Frances is absolutely correct, right? And of course she's correct because she's gone through these experiences herself. So anything that uses, I would say, things that are too reductive, right, that just are absolutes, they're always going to be wrong for those reasons. Okay? Alrighty, y'all. I'm going to keep on moving forward because there's still a bit more to go in terms of the notes here. This one is really important. And this is, again, also takes a lot of to break down. And this really points towards when people are stuck between two answer choices. So when stuck between two answer choices, become hypercritical. So really look at what's the differences between them, right? About differences between them in their tone, right? Is one more extreme than the other, and is the other one a bit more diplomatic, right? Differences in wording and context. And use evidence. Which one has more evidence backing it? That's important as well. Use evidence to differentiate between them so that you can pick the right answer. This is a trademark of a hard question, right? Where you really are stuck between two answer choices and they really feel like, that they sound so similar that you think they're saying the same things. So then you think about, well, what's the difference in wording, right? And do I have any tips for finding tone in a poem? Yes. So when we get to poetry, we'll go through that as well. I just want to get through all of this right now so that we can move a little bit more quickly when we do the actual examples. Okay. So moving on, we're going to talk about vocabulary and context. So this is really important because, one of my friends who is basically studying, she's getting her PhD in linguistics. She once told us a couple of years back, that the letter or the word has, I think she said like something like 17 unique meanings in the English language. And that kind of blew my mind. And so I started thinking about, well, for a lot of words, I may know maybe the first, right, the primary or the secondary definitions, but I might not know the tertiary one, right, the third one, so on and so forth. And so it's a good idea to be open-minded about how things are used. I think that's really important about how to go about figuring out what they mean. So for vocabulary and context questions, for line number questions, go back to the passage. Go read. And this time you'll notice I said read instead of skim. 2 to 3 lines before. The 2 to 3 lines containing, right, the word or the line number that they pointed you to, and 2 to 3 lines after. Because that's really where the evidence is. So it's actually, it's really wonderful when you get a question that's vocabulary and context or line number or something where it points you directly to the passage, because then you know where to look. And that makes it a lot easier than trying to solve the question as a whole. The other thing I'll mention is whenever possible, and this is something that's not always possible, right? But whenever you can, and this also takes a certain amount of confidence in order to be able to do, whenever possible, try to ignore the answer choices. So for me, specifically for main idea, I do this all the time. Remember how I said that in reading comprehension, your worst enemy is doubt? So what happens is when you read a question and then you read the answer choices, after reading the question, if it's someone who's been doing the right things while they're reading, they'll have an answer in mind. And the thing is that their answer is most likely right if they've been reading it, taking notes, annotating in the right way. But what muddles up their way of thinking is by reading the answer choices. So I say, whenever possible, try to ignore the answer choices and think of the correct answer in your mind, in your own words, right? And then go searching for it in the answer choices. So for me, personally, if it's possible, I would read a passage. Sorry, I'm just flipping back and forth here by accident. I would read a passage and then I would cover the answer choices. This is me in real time taking a test. I will cover the answer choices and I'll think, what should the right answer be? Well, if you go back to paragraph 2, the passage said this, so the right answer should be something along the lines of this. Cool. Then I'll uncover the answer choices and I'll search for that answer. And I want to say like 95 out of 100 times it's there. Because like I said, I've already mastered kind of how to think like a test maker, right? So I know what the right answer should be, and now I'm just looking for the right wording. And by doing that, I'm able to move more quickly. I'm able to move with confidence. And most importantly, I'm not getting muddled by the other answer choices, right? And the reason why I say whenever possible is because if a question is worded, which of the following was not mentioned in the passage, I can't just go figure out, there could be 1,000 things not mentioned. So I actually have to read all the choices there. So you have to be strategic about when you use this strategy. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next bit. So this is whenever doing cause and effect questions specifically. Always go direct. All right. So just to help you all understand how to go, what do I mean by that? I'm going to come up with another example that was actually in a SHSAT passage a couple of years ago. So there was event A, which was there was this volcano that erupted, right? I'm not an artist by any means. Then B, it sent dust into the air. In C, let's say the next thing was it had broken holes into the ozone layer. It had damaged the ozone layer. And D, the ozone layer is damaged, but now there's dust particles everywhere. So the sun's rays are coming through, but they're not able to enter and warm the earth. So in E, there was no summer. Okay. So if I asked you, what caused this particular summer to not be warm, right? Or what caused there to be no summer this year? In the real world, we always say get to the root of the problem, right? So it's logical that a lot of people would say that, oh, the volcano eruption basically caused this year to not have summer. But on the test, this would be wrong. The right answer would be D, which is, oh, there were dust particles stuck and they weren't let the sun's rays coming through, warming up the earth. So it wasn't, that's the reason why there was no summer. It wouldn't be A. Does everybody understand that? That's what this means. Whenever there's cause and effect, think about the chain and always go one step back, right? Always go direct. If D was not there as an answer choice, you pick C, because that's in this line of thought, the next thing, right, that's directly behind it. So that's what I mean by this. Okay. All right. So let's go on to, excuse me, the next portion. I'm just going to go ahead and erase all of this. So this was just the example to understand why for cause and effect, we always go direct. And then now I'm going to go through, someone had asked about these questions before, the not/except questions. Not/except questions require, you to use, or utilize rather, not just use, you want to take advantage of it, a certain strategy known as POE. So POE, not everyone here might be comfortable with it, and this is why we don't use acronyms or abbreviations when we're doing essay writing in general. POE stands for processes of elimination. Let me give you all an example. If the question was, which of the following was not mentioned in the passage, or all of the following was mentioned in the passage except which one? Well, the way for me to pick the right answer is I would have to first see, oh, A was mentioned in lines 4 through 12. I don't see B anywhere, but maybe it's because I haven't looked hard enough. C I noticed in line 15, and D I noticed in line 37. Once I confidently have established where the other ones are, that's the only time I can pick B. So these questions take longer because they have to utilize process of elimination, right? But if you try to do them any other way, your chances of getting them wrong increase. So it's not worth it to try to rush them in order to, save a little bit of time, right? Also, locating it becomes easier if you have annotated, like we were saying from the beginning. That's why annotating is so important. Okay. All right. So this is everything for the bare essentials of how to read. This toolbox expands a little bit when we talk about poetry, right? And it changes a little bit. For example, in poetry, are we allowed to put marks on the ELA passage of the test, like highlighting your notes? As far as I know, you can definitely use pen and paper to mark it up, circle words, underline. I'm not 100% sure about the highlighting. Okay. So that's kind of where we are with the bare essentials, right? It evolves a little bit and changes a little bit based off of whether or not you move into poetry or you're doing a fiction passage versus nonfiction, but not by that much. These are the same tools that I would teach a sixth grader who's taking the Hunter test as I would someone who's preparing for the LSAT for their reading comprehension, right? These are the basics that they both need to be familiar with, and then they move forward. Another question I noticed was, are we allowed to use mechanical pencils? You are if they are number two, because remember, it's a Scantron. I would not personally risk it. I would just use a number two pencil that has been established as number two and go from there. All right. If everyone here is okay with this, then we're going to actually move on to examples now. Okay. Would Poe be useful for any other types of questions? So, sorry, this is a great question. Poe, process of elimination is actually fantastic for all types of questions. The only downfall of using process of elimination is it's very time consuming because you're constantly doing process of elimination then, right? Once you become comfortable with it, then yes, your speed increases, right? I'll give you this all as an analogy to think about for any of these types of questions of like, hey, would this be useful for this or that? If I tell you all to go right now and run the New York City Marathon, I don't know how many people out of the 145 can do it right away, right? But if I told you all you have a year to prepare and everyone prepares, the human body is amazing at its ability to adapt. The human mind, the human body, like it's actually amazing how good it is at adapting once it's been trained and putting in the practice. Preparation is the key to success, right? We've been saying that since the beginning of the night. So in that same sense, right, if you find that it's taking you long to do process elimination for every question, then you can get better at it by practicing it more, right? You can get faster at it. You can become more accurate at it. Okay. Yeah. All right. With that being said, are there any other questions before we move on? Are we allowed to use deeper meaning and literal meaning in a poem? Well, yeah, but it's more so about understanding figurative language more clearly. And I think that in poetry, when something is being said, it's being repeated often. That's the way that the author emphasizes it. So it's clear. Oh, do I have any tips for inference questions? Yeah, inference questions are kind of a lie in the sense that they're not necessarily there, right? You don't really have to think for yourself. You just need to use the evidence that's presented in the passage. So even inference questions are based off of what's in the passage, right? You don't have to think too hard about what's there. I think oftentimes the mistake people make in inference questions is they make too many leaps of judgment. And that's not something that you want to do. You want to stay within the bounds of like, oh, these are the things that were said. This is possible. This is likely. The other thing is inference questions are best answered by using something that is not an extreme answer, right? You're looking for safe words like may happen, right? Or may not happen. So that there's always a caveat behind them. All right. If there are no other questions, then I'm going to go ahead and move to do a passage so we can see this magic in action. And you all can see kind of like how to go about it. Okay. All right. So the first passage that I'm going to do is actually from Hunter Test, the sample test on the website, sample test 1. I've just taken the reading section and added it to this entire document. Just based off time, I don't think we'll be able to go through all of it. I would love to at least go through and I had a feeling, so I had only selected 3 passages, not the entire thing, but I want to get through at least the first 2 because this is a prose passage and the other one is a poem, and I believe those are the 2 that can show you varying ways of how I can handle each one, kind of thing. Okay, so sorry, do you have to bring our own pencils or will they be provided? You will need to come in prepared. There is no guarantee that they'll be there. Okay. Can we do this on our own? So the only reason why I don't want you to do it on your own is I've told you what to do in practice, but I want to show you how I would do it, right? Because there's a difference between just learning the theory of things versus seeing someone else actually put it into practice. That's the whole reason why I'm going to be doing this out loud, so you all can see how I think out loud. So every single moment as I'm reading this, you might see me just like randomly have a thought, but I'm going to have that thought out loud so you know exactly what I'm thinking. Okay. All right. Let's see. Reading passage 8. As I walked home from church with my mother that day, the street seemed as quiet and safe as our eyes. How suddenly tempting it seemed to me, this quest and this safety, compared to the place where I was going. For I decided to run away from my home and my mother that afternoon, down to the harbor to see the world. What would become of me, way down there? What would she do if I never came back? A lump rose in my throat at the thought of her in tears. It was terrible. Okay, so I get the sense of guilt, right? Our narrator is guilty. He's safe, right? Currently, because he brings up the word safe and safety compared to the place where he's going. and the rest of the world that he's trying to see is not safe. So not safe. And he's hesitant, right? A lump rose in the thought of tears, so he's a little hesitant. Okay. All right. Let's go on to the next one. And so that's how quick I am with my annotations. I'm just like, okay, what's important? What matters? What doesn't? And I think there's a level of confidence that you need to go through these annotations with. I think that's what's most important here. All the same, I'm going to do it. I kept thinking doggedly. So I'm going to just circle this because if it's highlighted, or sorry, if it's underlined, I know that it's most likely going to be a question, right? And yet suddenly, as we reached our final front steps, how near I came to telling her. But no, she would only spoil it all. She wanted me always up in the garden. She wanted me never to have any thrills. Okay. So again, he's torn, right? He's not someone who's super determined, who's going to do it right away. He keeps on telling himself this. I kept thinking doggedly. All the same, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So doggedly means like he's trying to convince himself, right, of trying to do it. So this is what I mean by like here already I'm predicting kind of an answer to this question by saying, oh, what does doggedly mean, right? He thinks he's going to do it. He thinks he's going to do it. And I think that's another tactic here that you want to take advantage of. So he came too close to telling her, but he's like, nope, she would just spoil it. Okay, cool. Let's keep on moving. My mother knew me so well. She had seen that when she read stories of fairies, witches, and goblins out of my book to Sue and me, while Sue, though 2 years younger, would sit there like a dark imp, her black eyes snapping over the fights. I would creep softly out of the room, ashamed and shaken, and wait in the hall outside till the happy endings was in plain view. So I'm gonna stop right there. This sentence is very long, so I really want to dissect it. So his mother knew him really well, and so he's scared. And Sue is not, right? And 2 years younger, I would imagine Sue is his sister. His sister is not scared. Okay. So my mother had gradually toned down all the fightings and the killings, the witches and the monsters, and much to my disappointment, had wholly shut out the gory pirates who were, for me, the most frightfully fascinating of all. Okay, this part's important. So even though he's scared of these things, he really likes the pirates, right? He even calls them gory, right? But he finds them fascinating. And this might be why he's going out to sea, right? Sometimes I felt vaguely that for this, she had her own reason, too. That my mother hated everything that had to do with the ocean, especially my father's dock that made him so gloomy and silent. So there's another added layer to this now. So he wants to go to explore the world through the dock, the harbor, and she dislikes the harbor as well because it reminds her of his father's job at the dock. But of this, I could never be quite sure. I would often watch her intently with a sudden sharp anxiety, for I love my mother with all my soul, and I could not bear to see her unhappy. So at the same time, even though he's trying to escape, he knows that he hates disappointing his mom, or he hates making her sad, period. Never in any account I heard her say to Belle, are the children to go down the street toward the docks? Yes, ma'am, said Belle. I'll see to it. So Belle is probably their babysitter. Or caretaker or something, you know? And once I wanted to go there. So he wants to go because she said they're not allowed to go. The street in front of our house sloped abruptly down at the next corner 2 blocks through poorer and smaller houses to a cobblestone space below, over which trucks clattered plainly on their way to the docks. So I could go down and around by that way. How tempting it all looked down there. So it looked tempting because he's not allowed there. So he's still a child, right? He's only doing it because he's not allowed kind of thing. Okay, cool. So what I like to do is before I move on to the questions, I like to do a whole summary just based off my annotations. So our narrator feels guilty because he's trying to leave his mom. He's trying to go someplace not safe, even though he's safe with her. He's hesitant about the whole thing. He's torn, even though he thinks I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. He keeps on telling himself. His mom knows him really well. They have a great relationship. His sister is not scared. He's more of a scaredy cat, but he's interested by gory pirates. His mom doesn't like the harbor because their dad's dock is there, and the dock doesn't bring good memories. But he loves his mom, and he doesn't want to see her unhappy. She's told their babysitter never to let them down the docks, but maybe that's another reason why he wants to go, and that's it. And so that quick summary helps me kind of like realign, reassure that I have the entire passage as a whole down, and then I can move on to the questions. And now the questions, I don't really think about the questions as like, oh, is this an inference question? Is this a vocab and context questions? I immediately do that recognition because I've been doing this for so long, right? Maybe it'll take you a bit of time to be like, okay, wait, this is this type of question, and I need to use this strategy. But otherwise, it's pretty much you want to get to that level of like, oh, it's automatic. I know that this is this type of question. I know that I can use process of elimination for this one. I know for this one I should go back. For this one I should look at my annotations, so on and so forth. So this is the part where reading comprehension practice literally does make perfect, right? For reading comprehension, because the more practice you have, the nice thing about it is it never changes, right? It's the same thing over and over again. The passages might get a little bit more complicated as you get older, but the strategies stay constant, right? So this practice goes really, really far. Okay, so let's go 1. The comparison that the narrator makes between the streets and the mother's eyes in lines 1 to 2 suggests he finds the streets on that day to be what? Well, he says the streets are safe, right? Right, compared to the place where I was going. The streets seemed as safe and quiet and safe as our eyes, so he finds them safe. Looking for the word safe, comforting. That's my answer, and I'm moving on. As used in line 7, doggedly. So here, I don't actually want to look at the answer choices, right? I said that doggedly means what? He kept on saying it over and over again. So he's trying to convince himself, right? So I'm looking for a word that means over and over again, trying to convince himself. Over and over again, trying to convince himself. Persistently is the best answer. And I do a quick scan. I'm like loudly, tiredly, fearfully, dreamily. Which one's closest to my answer? Persistently. And that's how I pick it. The next question. The narrator decides not to tell his mother his plans to run away because she would, well, he says she would spoil them. She would tell him no. She wouldn't let him do it. Be very angry with him, ignore them, ruin them, tell Sue, make him do gardening. Which of these is she wouldn't let him do it? It's ruin them, right? Because if she's angry with him, that's not the same thing as ruin them, right? If she's angry with him and she lets him do it anyway, that's not what he's trying to say, right? The description of Sue's black eye snapping over the fights in the books. Okay, I don't know where the rest of the question is. Oh, the mother would read to them, line 12, implies that Sue is what? Okay, so if it gives me a line number, I'm going to go back. Line 12 is right here. It says, Sue would sit there like a dark imp, her black eye snapping over the fights. I would creep softly out the room. So she's excited. She's still, about them, right? Excited. I'm looking for excited. Afraid means sad, unintelligent, feisty. Now, I don't see the word excited there, but which of these is closest to excited? I'm going to go with feisty. All right, she's definitely not afraid, not mean, not sad, not unintelligent. The narrator compares himself to Sue in order to highlight what? Well, it's to highlight how scared he is as opposed to how brave she is, right? So it's to show that he's a lot more, hurt by these things as opposed to her. He describes her as dark and impish, right? It's to highlight his youth, his sensitive nature, his indifference, easygoing disposition, sneakiness. Okay, so it's definitely not sneakiness, indifference, or youth, because she's only 2 years younger. So it's between easygoing disposition and sensitive nature. Well, he seems more like a scaredy cat, so I wouldn't go with easygoing, because easygoing would be quote unquote chill, right? So this is sensitive nature for sure. Let's move on. 6, the narrator's feelings about the gory pirates can best be described as what? Well, this is something that he finds frightfully fascinating, is the way he put it. So he's scared, but he can't stop looking away, right? Or reading up on them. So I'm looking for something as close to frightfully fascinating as possible. Frightfully fascinating would be scared but intrigued, right? The passage suggests that the narrator's father's occupation is connected in some way with what? Well, we said it's the harbor, it's the docks, so it's got to be the sea. And so you might be asking, oh, is it really that easy? This felt way too simple. Well, it really is that easy, and it really is that fast, right? Once you get more, accustomed to it, it only gets easier and faster, right? Are there any questions before I move on to the poem? And yes, to my knowledge, the Hunter test uses line numbers instead of paragraph numbers. But before I move on, does anyone have any other questions? Okay, all right. I'm going to just quickly try to do the poem and then wrap things up because we have a little bit less than 10 minutes. Okay. So for the poem, instead of annotating paragraph to paragraph, I'm getting this ready. I'm going to annotate stanza to stanza. One thing to pay attention to in poems is when things change, because that highlights there's going to be a shift in something, right? Remember, you can predict questions if you can understand emphasis and where emphasis is being put, right? So one thing I notice is all the stanzas are different lengths. So maybe each of them, there's something important happening in each of them. And so I need to understand what's the big story for each stanza. The other thing is that, is there a consistent rhyme scheme? If there is, and then that consistency changes, that's going to signal to me that, oh, something important is happening here and I got to pay attention. Okay. So reading passage B, slanted figures. The slanted figures pushing west on Madison were leaning against air. The wind, my mother said, is terrible. Her voice breaking inside that word. I was 5. Marshall Field's department store was lost behind us. The wind had needle teeth. Its big flat hands were in my jacket, in my pants. Did I cry out? Okay, so our narrator is 5 years old, and it's windy. That's the thing to remember. It's windy, right? And that makes sense. The slanted figures are the people fighting against the wind as they're trying to walk, right? Let's see. Because they also keep on mentioning the wind and the air. I can't be too general and say I can't be too more specific and say storm because it doesn't say it's raining or anything like that. She led me in some stone wall spinning door, up into a sidewalk in the air, a protected crossing between office buildings. Suits and dresses stared at us. We saved 2 blocks, she whispered. So the suits and dresses are staring at them as they're going through a different way. So chances are, if everyone else is in suits and dresses and they're just there, they don't belong, right? They stand out. Maybe don't belong. We saved 2 blocks, she whispered. So it was a shortcut. And she's trying to take advantage of the shortcut because they don't want to move through the wind that's so sharp against them. She whispered as we took the escalator down, and then we had to cross Chicago River. Okay, the Windy City. It's Chicago. Okay, it's making sense. The Madison Street Bridge. Some years, my mother said, they ran ropes down the stairs of these buildings to help people from blowing away. So she's like telling him a little story about, sometimes there were ropes here so people don't blow away. The river, thick as slush but green, its icy mouth whispering, be careful, little boy, licked at what we walked on. The wind was in my shoes. So here, we don't see this for the first time. This is actually the second time, and we should have taken notice of this. Our narrator uses a lot of personification, right? It says the wind had needle teeth, its big flat hands. So that's why I'm just writing this down using personification. For those of you unfamiliar with it, personification just stands for giving something that's not a person or human-like, people-like qualities. My mitten held my mother's glove that held me to the earth and knew the way to the Chicago and Northwestern station. Our feet were stumps, she said. Inside, as the train jerked, groaned, and rolled into darkness, smoke, and sparks, the conductor calling out, each pausing in the dark. So their feet were stumps because they're trying to stand still as the train is moving, right, in the train car. I counted us home, Chicago's furthest and still unshoveled corner. Our snow was clean. Our house, it's stucco white and tight opened. Okay, so it had snowed recently, and the wind is still there. We don't know if it's snowing now. From behind our kitchen window, we saw other trains, lights sliding past, the city exhaling clouds of people into icy air. It's terrible out there, my mother said. I just won't thaw. So she's really cold right now as well. So they make the journey back into their home now, but it's still so cold they're not able to thaw. Okay. All right. I think that's everything. So let me just go through this one more time. So a young boy and his mom are going through, I guess, a busy part of Chicago, the Marshall Field's department store. Maybe they did some shopping, not sure. But it's really windy. And they take a shortcut through, I guess, this office building where they stood out. Then they go across the Chicago River, and then they take the train home. And even though they live a little bit outside of Chicago, Chicago's furthest and still unshoveled corner, the way he had put it, there's still snow there. It's still cold. It's cold everywhere. Okay, great. So I think I understand it. Let's move on to the questions. The people in stanza 1 are slanted figures because they're leaning into. So if you put snowstorm, you'd be wrong because there's just not enough evidence for it. Strong wind is the safest answer here. And all the above would be wrong because other people doesn't make sense. That's like people bumping into each other. In stanza 2, the suits and dresses scare the mother and her son because the mother and son are what? Well, it's because they stand out, or right, they don't belong, stand out, are out of place. So 9 is C. 10, in stanza 2, the mother speaks to her son twice in order to do what? So where does she speak twice? We saved 2 blocks. Some years, my mother said, they ran ropes down. So she's just giving him information. She's explaining what's happening, right? So show off, frighten him, make excuses for himself, provide information, comfort him. So if you say comfort him, right? If you say comfort him, then that's not necessarily true because the other information about the ropes don't comfort him. So it's more so to provide information. In stanza 2, the boy describes the river as what? Well, he says, right, that the river is slush and green. It's ice mouth, licked at what we walked on. So it's some kind of monster that might eat him. It says, be careful, little boy, right? As coming alive, yes, a monster threatening the bridge, talking to him. So it's E, all of the above. The train ride is described as what? So let's go back. Well, the train ride is from Chicago to this place, which is furthest and still unshoveled. So it's completely different from one place to another because they'd never mentioned snow before. So the answer would probably be endless and scary, boring but brief, between two worlds. It's not endless and scary because we get to the end. Boring but brief. I don't think it's boring because he's talking about how the train jerked and groaned. Between two worlds sounds good. Terrifying but harmless. Not terrifying, that's extreme. Across the suburbs. It's not across, it's going from the city to the suburbs. So C is the best answer. Okay. How do we avoid taking meaningless annotations? Well, the thing is, you don't know what's meaningful and what's meaningless. And remember, Daisy, the annotations are meant for you. So whatever helps you understand it. If I take 5 more lines of annotations to understand it better, I'm going to take the 5 more lines because that's going to help me get the questions right. I'd rather have all the questions right with 5 more annotations than do 5 less and have a chance of getting 2 wrong. Do you understand what I mean? It's a balance thing, right? And my thing is the simpler the better, but again, keep in mind it's to your level of understanding. Okay. With that being said, and with 2 minutes left, I want to be very respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to just summarize everything really quickly and also answer that question about overconfidence because someone had asked that, and I think that's a really important question. So the first thing I'm gonna do is actually answer the question about overconfidence. So there's been the psychological study done for many years, and it's been repeated over time. It's about the level of stress someone has and performance. So, and it's a bell curve. So if you're not stressed at all, if you're overconfident, because that's usually what that means, right? If you have low stress, you're really, really confident. You're going to perform badly because you're going to make silly mistakes, right? You're going to overlook things. If you're too stressed out, you're going to freeze. You can't do anything. But if you have just enough stress where it keeps you at your toes, that's where you can perform to the highest degree possible for yourself. Does that make sense? So it's the thing about having balance, right? And confidence comes with, and this is important, confidence comes with practice, right? So that's my thing about overconfidence. And then the last thing I'll leave you all with is, regardless of how the test goes in January and what the results are in the weeks after, remember that you've just begun your journey, right? You will constantly be learning, right? And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind, that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, as you're constantly learning, build a good habits, put in the work, and down the line, you will find it rewarding yourself in any and every kind of situation. I think that's the most important thing to take away from today's session. I know I gave you all a bunch of tools to work on, but I think the most important takeaway here is that the keys to success don't happen overnight. You need to take the time to, put it into practice. And that's what's most important.
Everyone, let's take a moment to type thank you into the chat box. I will begin. Mo, can you change the settings to say chat with everyone? Can everyone change the settings, please? Mo, who wants to, let's say, wow, look at how many thank yous. I didn't even have a chance to type. Okay, ready? I'm on video. Do you want to spotlight me? Ready? Guys, this is not one of my moments, but all right. Who wants to see a cute doggy? Wait, just 1 second, Jacob. Shay, look at our doggy. Ooh, look, we have one doggy. Wait, Goldie, come here. Come. Guys, I am going to show you. Are you ready? Am I in spotlight? Hi, guys. Am I here? Hold on. Ready? Hi, guys. Look at this cute doggy. Am I in spotlight? Look, I can't spotlight myself too much. Yes. Okay, ready, guys? Look at this doggy. Do you see a cute doggy? Who wants to see a second cute doggy? Oh my gosh, we have two cute doggies. Okay, ready? Wait, let me have this one. Jacob, say hi to everybody.
Hey, buddy.
Say good luck on the hunter test. Wait, Jessica, bring me my dog. This is a very important moment for the children. This is an emotional support. Ugh. Okay, ready? Wait, hold on. Munchkin, relax. Do you guys love this dog? Guys, guess how many pounds this dog is? Guess how many pounds? Munchkin is 1.5 pounds. Look at how cute and full of energy. Mo, do you believe we have two dogs? I knew you. I knew you had 0 dogs. Are you impressed?
I
By
am.
the prep? All right, everyone. I wish you good luck. Say good luck. Say good luck. Jacob, say good luck. Say good luck, everyone. Say good luck. Good luck. Good luck, guys. Bye. Bye, everyone. Look at that face. Sorry, guys. I get no more dog time. Okay. Good luck, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow night. Okay. 7 to 9. Thank you, everyone. Mo, I'm going to take a screenshot of this. Just give me 1 second. Guys, I'm going to take a screenshot of these beautiful thank you notes because, hold on. I'm not going to hold the dog because I'm taking a screenshot. Ready? I'm taking screenshot number 1. Uh-oh. I'm taking screenshot number 2. Oh my gosh, Mo, you got so many thank yous. Wow, Mo.
They're very kind.
Wow. This has been extremely helpful. Okay, ready? Mo, there's so many thank yous. I need to keep taking these screenshots. Holy moly. Oh my gosh, look at that. There's a combination of cute dog messages and thank you so much, Mo. Aw, that's so nice. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Mo. These are beautiful, gorgeous. Thank you so much. This was more helpful than we expected. Do you see that? Look at how nice that was.
Yeah.
Aw. All right, guys. I just want to share with you that we're very happy. Bye, everyone. Say bye. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Bye. Bye. Bye, guys. Enjoy that tonight.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. I'm going to be closing out the rooms. Take care. Thank you all for your time.